Let's go now to reporter Sarah Gerathy at the State Emergency Operations Centre in Sydney. Sarah, so what can you tell us about the latest situation in terms of warnings and rescues in New South Wales?
Well, look, Joe, there are currently dozens of emergency warnings in place across the state, in the northern area of the state, of course. More than 19,000 residents have been instructed by the State Emergency Service to evacuate now before it becomes too dangerous when the hurricane hits. The cyclone hits, I should say. Evacuation orders are in place in a huge range of areas across the north of the state, including Lismore, Kyogle, Bowraville, Maxville and parts of Port Macquarie, so that far down the coast. And the advice is that you should seek shelter with a friend or a relative if they're close by, and if not, to head to an evacuation centre, although people are being asked not to travel on the roads unless they are doing so, obviously to clear the way for those that need to leave their residences and also for emergency services. Now, the Premier, Chris Minns, earlier today said that most people are heeding that advice to evacuate and to leave, but he did stress that that means that if you choose to stay, it's likely that you will be alone. So you could find yourself the only house with somebody still in it in your street, and obviously help very difficult to come by as this weather worsens. Now, you mentioned before the search that's underway up near Dorrigo, where a man has been washed off a bridge and swept into floodwaters. As you said, he was able to get out of the four-wheel drive that he was driving in and cling onto a branch of a tree, but while officers managed to make contact with him, he was then swept away and disappeared under the waters. So helicopters searching there. And unfortunately, it's not the first flood rescue that we've seen. In the last 24 hours, there's been 5 of them. And the SES said today that it is concerned because obviously as this weather front continues and then that massive amount of water begins to move through the river system, flooding is going to become a real issue in the next few days. And they're very concerned about people entering floodwaters. Here's what they had to say.
The fact that we're already getting flood rescue calls this early into the incident and the situation will deteriorate in the next 24 to 48 hours, I can't be clearer not to do that, and that's why our key message has been to relocate and now evacuate early before the situation worsens.
And Sarah, there's a critical water shortage emerging around the Tweed. What's been happening there?
Look, there are now strict emergency water restrictions in place in 4 locations across the Tweed, Joe, and that's because the situation with the power cuts is starting to affect the water treatment plants and the pumping stations up there. Essentially, it means that the only available water is that which is already in the pipes and the reservoirs around that area. And so the people in those 4 areas which are affected, in particular Yukai, Tyalgum, Terranora and West Cudgeon, are being told only to use water for essential purposes. So that's essentially drinking, cooking and essential hygiene, really, just hand washing. The reason for that is obviously there is concern. They don't want them to run out of water at a time when they really need it. And that warning is being asked, I guess, for people to cooperate with across the whole of the Tweed, because there are concerns, again, that will only worsen. And that's, of course, because of the situation with the power cuts. We've now got nearly 40,000 homes and businesses across the north of the state that have not had power, and the authorities today were saying, unfortunately, that is likely to only increase, and it will likely be a number of days before power can be restored to most of those locations, because it simply will not be safe for energy workers to be out fixing power. Now, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has said that generators will be made available from the national stockpile as soon as it's safe to do so, but he has said that that will not be enough to keep the lights on in all of those locations. So as this weather continues, as the rain continues, they are expecting to see more power cuts and, of course, more issues with communications towers going down. So this is really the issue for the people up in the north of the state as they look towards the worst of the weather hitting overnight and into tomorrow morning, is being able to stay in touch with what's going on the ground. So they are being urged as well as to evacuate, but also to prepare with things like battery-operated radios so that they can keep across the latest information if they are unable to see on their phones, check their check websites and apps, as they so often do, to stay in touch when these sorts of things happen.
Okay, Sarah Gerathy there in Sydney.